The Everly Brothers are one of the greatest pop acts of all time. And this year marks two major anniversaries for them. It's 40 years since Bye Bye Love, their first single, was recorded, and today is Don Everly's 60th birthday. Don Everly was born on this day in 1937, and his brother Phil came along 2 years later. Their father Ike was an accomplished guitar player, and he taught the boys a few chords as soon as they could hold a guitar. Well, by the time Don was 8 and Phil was 6, they were playing and harmonizing together and singing with the rest of the family.
Brothers, it was traditional. The Wilburn brothers, Leuven brothers. My mom and my dad and his two brothers, they were a trio. So, I mean, they were a second generation Everly brothers when you really get down to it. Family sang together. It's traditional in the South. On the back porch, the family gets together, and on the front porch and sings together.
The Everly brothers' parents, Ike and Margaret, were well known in the southern states as country and gospel singers. During the day, Ike worked in the coal mines of Kentucky, and at night played concerts. Don and Phil would sit in on rehearsals and learn the country music songs of the day. Here's Margaret Everly.
My husband worked with a boy from North Carolina, and they called themselves the North Carolina Boys. They would come home to rehearse songs, and Phil would get in and help sing. And he had a high voice, so they would see how high he could go. They would hit a note, and Phil would repeat the note. All these entertainers, they didn't mind taking a little time to say, hey, you sound good, boy. Let's hear you sing Cool Water or something, and Phil would do that. And they would come home and rehearse the old songs like Barbara Allen, and the boys would hear that.
Barbara Allen, recorded by the Everly Brothers on the album Songs Our Daddy Taught Us in 1958. As well as doing concert tours with their parents, the Everly Brothers also joined them performing on the radio as the Everly Family. Don remembers these programs.
Well, it's a family show where, good morning, everybody. We'd sing the theme song, all of us, and then good morning, it's the Everly family. And this is Dad, and this is, Mom, and Don, and baby boy Phil. And Dad would MC it, and then we'd sing a song, and Phil and I would sing a duet, then Phil would sing a song, and then Mom would do a recitation, and we'd all sing a trio in back of it, and then we'd play an instrumental, then we'd sing a gospel song. It was the family, the Everly family, up in the morning, early morning, 5 o'clock, 5:30, 6, for the farmers in Iowa when they were up getting their cows together and doing all that and cooking breakfast and getting ready to go to the fields.
I kind of suggest that we get the Everly Brothers to team up on one here. Phil, what are you going to sing this time?
Well, Dad, we'd like to do a number for the folks, and it's called Don't Let a Love Die. Someone stole you, my darling, from me. Someone stole my love and your heart. Is it really true you don't care for me? Have you missed me since we've been apart? Oh, what can I do to make you...
The Everly Family Radio Show broadcast in 1952 with Don aged 15 and baby boy Phil just 13. Well, by the time Don and Phil were at high school, they were pretty accomplished performers. Don was a big fan of Hank Williams and had decided that he wanted to become a country music songwriter.
I was a big fan of Hank Williams, and he was right songwriter. All of a sudden, that just dawned on me that's what and I was very fortunate. I got one published when I was about 17. Chet Atkins came to Knoxville, Tennessee, where we were working. Dad had been corresponding with him, and he invited us to Nashville, Phil and I went over and showed him some of the songs. And he gave me some pointers. He really did, because I just heard the original song that was recorded, Thou Shalt Not Steal, by Kitty Wells back in 54, I think. And I just heard it again for the first time in 25 or 30 years, I forget. And I can't believe I really wrote it now. I'm going to have to call Chet up and ask him, how much did he help me? Kitty Wells, it was a follow-up to her, and we made enough money, I'll tell you. Made enough money off that to get us to Nashville. Buy new tires for the car and get us into the Union and some outfits and just set us up here for a little bit.
I stole to satisfy a longing in my heart. I didn't stop to realize
Thou Shalt Not Steal, a song which was a big hit for Kitty Wells in 1955 and was written by Don Everly. And it was Chet Atkins who was helping the boys get started in the music business. Chet was running a small publishing company at the time and had met the boys at a gig a year earlier.
Yeah, I brought them to town first when they were 15 and 17. And I rented them up in Knoxville. Their father played guitar, fingerstyle guitar. And so I'd heard of him a long time. And so I played up there at a fair, and they came out to see me at the fair, and I guess they didn't have money to get in. They were outside the fence, this wire screen fence, talking to me, and I didn't think at the time, I was a little stupid that I should have gotten them on in to the fair. But anyway, I said, my boys here, good singers. He said, I want to bring them over to Nashville and let you hear some of their stuff, some of their songs. And at the time, I had a little publishing company. I was not working for a record company except freelancing, and so I brought them over, and they had a song, After I Say I've Forgotten You, and Aren't You Loves It? Here we are again. And I got Wanda Jackson to record it.
In 1955, with the help of Chet Atkins and the money Don had earned from Thou Shalt Not Steal, the Everlys moved to Nashville. But as Phil Everly remembers, it wasn't all plain sailing.
We got on records immediately when we went to Nashville. I was 16 and came out and bombed, and that's a hilarious story, that one. We cut 4 sides in 22 minutes with Carl Smith's band, who had just driven in from California, which is like a 2,000-mile trip, nonstop. And we're doing the session as early in the morning, doing the session before they went home. So you know they were in a hurry, and we cut 4 sides. And I sang sharp through the last 3, you know. They were really bad.
The Everly Brothers had a couple of songs released on Columbia Records, but they failed to make any impact at all. Eventually, after trying a number of different companies, they went to see Wesley Rose, who was the head of the Nashville-based publishing company, Acuff Rose.
A couple of country boys, which were harmony singers, came in my office, and I liked what I heard. I called up Archie Blyer because I was scheduled to record some country records for Cadence, which was just then going into the country business, and asked him if I could record these boys, so he agreed. It was country harmony. But remember, country harmony wasn't heard, so it was unique and unusual for all markets.
Wesley Rose saw the potential in the Everly Brothers, and after fixing them with a record deal with Cadence Records, set about finding them the right song to record. He introduced Don and Phil to 2 Acuff Rose songwriters, Felice and Wesley Bryant.
I was a pop writer. My technique came from Italian ballads, and Budlow was a concert violinist, but his background was country, gospel, fa sol la singing, that's singing with shape notes. Budlow had the most fantastic feeling for chord structure that you ever saw. Your ear would go into orgasms over these chord structures. They were gorgeous.
And it was Felice and Wesley Bryant who came up with the first hit song for the Everlys.
Budlow and I are building this lake house, and we're on the way to the lake, and Budlow's all excited. He's got an idea for Johnny and Jack. And I said, well, what is it? So he starts with, bye-bye love, bye-bye happiness. Have you ever heard Johnny and Jack? Have you ever heard a thing called, oh, your poison love has stained the lifeblood in... That's Johnny and Jack. That's the same, bye-bye love, that's the same chick, you know? So now Archie Blyer is coming to town. I don't know how Wesley made this connection, but he's coming down to add a country section to Cadence. So Wesley was given the Everlys, or the Everlys were introduced to Wesley by Chet, because Chet couldn't do anything for them on RCA. And the click, the magic, happened there. Budlow called Johnny and Jack and asked them if they would release the song, because Archie loved it. The Everlys were ready to do anything that anybody said to get on record. So the kids did it, and that night at the Opry, all I heard was, man, did you hear that session? Did you hear that session? And they were talking about these kids, good-looking guys, and this dance song, Bye-Bye Love. Hell, I can still sing that thing. It's been haunting me ever since I left that session. So I said to Phil, I think something's happening here. I said, I've never heard so much buzz about a song, a new recording. I said, ever. And he said, gee, do you really think so? I hope you're right. Well, Archie was hearing it. Boodle was hearing it. And it happened. It hit all 3 markets within 2 weeks.
Bye-bye, my love, goodbye. Bye-bye, my love, goodbye.
Bye Bye Love, written by Felice and Boodle Bryant, launched the Everly Brothers on the road to becoming one of the biggest pop acts in the world. And this song also helped Don achieve his lifelong ambition.
I wanted to get on the Grand Ole Opry. And I realized that we weren't typically Grand Ole Opry material when I arrived here. I mean, I wasn't Hank Williams, and we weren't the Louvin brothers. They were typically the country sound. But Bye Bye Love changed everything, you know, just changed everything. From standing outside in the alley, we were on the stage. My life had hit the pinnacle when I was 19 or 20. Where's it go? I've done it, you know. I have hit it. I couldn't believe it. First of all, we were also very, very popular. We would play the Paramount Theater in New York, you know, 4 or 5 shows a day, screaming teenagers throwing lipstick tubes and things at us and craziness and, you know, all that. But it'd come to the Opry. You'd go and you'd sing, and that whole family audience would roar at the end of the song, and we'd sing another chorus, then they'd roar again, and we'd sing another couple of choruses, and it'd walk off, and the feeling was just incredible because it was your people.
And it was Don Everly's country music background, coupled with his love of rock and roll, that helped to shape the Everly Brothers' sound. The country harmonies added to the rhythmic rock and roll acoustic guitar became the Everly's trademark. Don Everly developed this guitar style after talking to Chet Atkins.
I told him, I said, I'm really crazy about Bo Diddley's rhythms and things. This was back when I was a teenager, basically. And he said, I said, what do you think he does? And he said, well, he's tuning it differently. And so he showed me some tunings, G tuning. He showed me some things in the G tuning, which I took and used that as the basic for all the arrangement things in the early Everly Brothers stuff. And all the intros to Bye Bye Love and the fills and all that on Wake Up Little Susie's, all inspired by that. People would meet me and they'd say, what are you doing there? I'd still have the tuning. They said, One of the little rewards I had in life, not too long ago, but years ago, I was doing a fair date up in Canada. And this little 9-year-old boy was standing there and this cowboy hat on and things, and walking by, and Mr. Everly, you know, said, I have a question. He said, how do you do that thing in the Wake Up Little Susie? I said, well, you got to tune it to G, put a capo on it and get it up the neck there. And it said, you know, I explained it to him a little bit. And he seemed so relieved.
Wake Up Little Susie, the second hit for the Everly Brothers, and written again by the songwriting team of Felice and Boodle Bryant. And it was the Everly's next release, which was to be their first #1, and a song that's still regarded by many of their fans as their greatest song ever. Again, it was written by Boodle Bryant.
Boodle made a demo, and Boodle said, what do you think of that? And I said, my God, I said, your demo's a hit. I said, you could release that one and it's a hit. And the song was a hit with the Everlys, but not taken away from anybody. The song was a hit. A song can be a hit and still be in the books, but it's a hit. Just hasn't gotten out there yet. You know, a fast horse is a fast horse, even if he's in the barn.
Dream, 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 dream.
By the summer of 1958, with Elvis Presley away in the army, the Everly Brothers were the biggest rock and roll act in the world. They toured extensively, and Don remembers one particular tour in Texas where the Everlys were supported by Buddy Holly and the Crickets, and what was probably the world's first ever supergroup came together.
We had a band that did not work at all, hired hands, as they say, and they didn't even like the music. Buddy listened to it, and I listened to it, and I went, oh. And Buddy said, we'll back you. I said, but will you? And he said, sure. He's so gracious man. And so it was Phil and I and the Crickets, Buddy, out there. Him, you know, and one hell of a show, let me tell you. We kicked it.
Things had happened remarkably quickly for the Everlys. By this time, Don was just 21 and Phil only 19. Virtually straight from high school to being the biggest act in the world. Wesley Rose remembers what it was like for these two young country boys out in the big wide world.
After we'd had 4 or 5 million sellers, and we used to play the Ed Sullivan TV show, And on the second Ed Sullivan TV show, we were staying in New York, and I went over to the rehearsal, and the boys were late. They were about a half hour late, so after the rehearsal, I went back to the hotel with them, and I said, that'll be the last time you're late. From now on, I want you on time because our reputation is worth something, and it's unfair to the producer to be late. And either Don or Phil, I don't recall which, said, well, it's a problem calling downstairs. And I asked them what they called downstairs for. They said to find out what time it was. And I looked at the wrist, and neither one of them had a wristwatch. So we went out right downstairs in the first jewelry store and bought them each a wristwatch. And this is what I mean. Their moral character was so good they didn't complain about anything until it really hit you on the blind side. You see, they're both small-town boys, and it was a little hard for them to believe how big their success was.
Well, we were naive because our parents were naive. We were just country musicians. We didn't steal, cheat. My father was a coal miner. He got a job on radio. And so basically, when it came down to business, he didn't know anything about business. He didn't teach me anything about business. And when you run up against an accountant like Wesley, or you run up against a lot of these people, you know, that were running the record businesses and publishing businesses, you know, naive. I guess would be the answer to that one.
During 1959, the Everlys recorded 4 more hits written by Felice and Boodle Bryant: Bird Dog, Problems, Take a Message to Mary, and Poor Jenny. And then came the first song written by Don Everly. In the studio, he called on Jerry Allison of the Crickets to play the same sort of tom-tom drum sound that he'd played for Buddy Holly on Peggy Sue.
I changed the arrangement sounds. I used the drums as the focal point. And that song was also a love song, a true song, kind of. That song was about really going to Australia and kissing a girl. And on the way back, writing the song. That's what that was about.
I kissed ya.
Till I Kissed You, written by Don Everly. As time went on, a tension was growing between the Everly brothers and their manager, publisher Wesley Rose. Wesley dictated the songs they recorded, how they recorded them, and he wouldn't entertain any songs that he didn't own the publishing on. Now that, of course, began to cause problems.
He was a jolly man when I first met him. He changed over the years, but he was a very jolly and happy man, and I hung out with him, spent a lot of time with him, going to dinner and living a really kind of an Italian lifestyle, and it was wonderful, and I enjoyed it. He was a very strong man, very opinionated. When it came to music, he couldn't fathom why I would want to do Let It Be Me. It seemed the only thing he really liked was what he published. In fact, that was the case. If we liked something, he'd try to get it, hold to the writer and try to get the publishing on, and if he couldn't, then he didn't like it. So, I mean, that's basically what that was about. It's disturbing that that could go on, but that was the way it was. He was a publisher, and the artist was on their own. We didn't have a manager. Unfortunately, he was acting as a manager, and he wasn't acting in our best interest.
In an attempt to break the hold that Wesley Rose had over the recording sessions, the Everlys recorded Let It Be Me away from Nashville in New York. And not only was the song not published by Acuff Rose, it was also their first recording using strings.
I bless the day I found you.
Let It Be Me was the final song the Everlys recorded for Cadence Records. And in early 1960, they signed to the newly formed Warner Brothers Records for $1 million.
The 2 boys had decided they no longer wanted to be on Cadence about a year before the contract was over. So it wasn't a thing of all of a sudden deciding to leave. So I started working to negotiate a contract. And at that particular time, Warner Brothers was just starting over here. They had been out maybe a year or 2. And I had talked to Jim Conkling, president of Warner Brothers. Well, the negotiations were working fine right up until the last day before the announcement. And at that time, Jim Conkling and I had a misunderstanding, so I told him the deal was off. Well, there was a fellow called Herman Starr, who was head of Warner Brothers Publishing, who was head of all the Warner Brothers at the time. And he called me up and said, Wes, look, we need the Everly Brothers bad, otherwise we may just close the label. The label is very unsuccessful. And he says, I'll give you even more than you're asking. I said, I don't want any more than I'm asking. I want exactly what we talked about. So we closed the deal out, and it was the first $1 million deal in the history of the record industry.
And the first song the Everlys recorded for Warner Brothers was another song written by Don Everly, Kathy's Clown, which was to become the Everlys' all-time biggest-selling record.
That's Kathy's Clown. That's Kathy's.
As Kathy's Clown reached #1 in Britain and America, the Everlys started their first tour of Britain backed by the Crickets. Back in America, Wesley Rose was trying to shape their career in the same way that Elvis had been directed by Colonel Tom Parker, into the movies. Phil Everly remembers the screen test.
They somehow managed to get a screen test, Wesley did, through an agency, and it cost him a lot of money, which at that time it was like $25,000. And they strapped guns on Don and I, and Donald was dressed as Black Bart, and I was the kind Charlie, you know, in brown. I looked like the clean cut, and he looked like Lash LaRue. Anyway, they had us in a cabin, I mean a real cabin, and it was the director from Bonanza, I think, or Wagon Train, somebody like that. I'm sitting in the cabin, and they switched it around so that Donald comes by the cabin door, and he's supposed to be a stranger, you know, and he comes by the window, and I'm sitting in the cabin, I'm saying, these are the words of a frontier lad, lost his love when he went bad, and we sing, take a message to Mary together, and we, you know, he says, howdy, stranger, and I say, howdy, stranger. We just sung this duet together, you know. Him standing outside my window, and he asks me a bunch of things, and this flubs around for, I don't know, 5 or 10 times, you know, about an 11th take, and Donald's last line is, well, I'll be seeing you, and I said, not in the movies.
But while the brothers were in Hollywood doing their screen test, another hit song came their way from the Crickets guitar player, Sonny Curtis.
I was in basic training in Fort Ord, California, and I wrote one verse, and I went down to Hollywood on a 3-day pass. The Everlys were down there studying acting at Warner Brothers. They had just been signed to Warner Brothers Records, and I played it to Don first, and he loved the song. He called Phil down, and they worked out that really nice harmony part that goes with the song. And they informed me that I'd have to write another verse, and so I went back off up to Fort Ord to be in the Army, and I got a 10-day leave to move down to Fort Gordon, Georgia, and I wrote another verse, and I put it in the mail to them. And a couple of days after I had mailed this verse to them, I got a letter from Jerry Allison. He said, the Everly Brothers just cut your song, and they sang the same verse twice.
I'm so lonesome every day.
The Everly Brothers had by this time sold over 20 million records, but things were far from well. In an argument over material, they finally split from their manager, Wesley Rose. And the same thing that had interrupted Elvis's career was looming. They were both facing 2 years in the Army.
We were going to get drafted, but the age difference would have put us out of commission if we had been drafted for 5 years. We wouldn't have been able to do anything. So the alternative was to get in the reserves and get our military obligation over with, so we joined together in the buddy system in the Marine Corps. That was quite a tumultuous period. 62, 63, the world was changing. You know, Elvis was sort of off, and the English thing was beginning to bubble under, and then by 64, that all changed. And you had the baby boomers, groundswell of teenagers all of a sudden. And as usual, they want their own, you know, music. Something 4 years earlier doesn't matter. They want what they hear in high school.
And although the Everlys did record a few classic songs after this time, like Crying in the Rain and The Price of Love, generally the records failed to make much impact. They were seen as being a bit old-fashioned. The Beatles and the Stones had arrived, and they were off in the Army. And coupled with poor management, they slipped from being rock stars onto the cabaret circuit.
I had a manager that would book me in any toilet between here and Hong Kong. Worked everywhere, you know. Spent about 10 years on the road of really heavy road work. I wound up being a nightclub act out of it. Played Vegas and all that. I've been everywhere so many times, I can't even remember. I get them all mixed up. And life's too short to just spend it in an airplane or a motel somewhere. I wouldn't do it again. It was a hard thing to stop, too, because I went out on this tour in 1963, and I didn't get off the road till 73. And it took a lot to stop it.
The Everly Brothers!
One and only rebel child.
The Everly Brothers in Cabaret at the Grand Hotel, Anaheim, California, in February 1970. The grueling round of 10 years on the road, 3 shows a night in this sort of venue, eventually took its toll. Increasingly, the brothers were falling out. They'd played together since they were at school, but now it was becoming impossible for them to continue to work together. Here's Don Everly.
Well, it's impossible, I think. I don't know anybody's ever done it for 40, 50 years. The people used to run me nuts with, well, why don't you want to sing with your brother? I say, you got any brothers or sisters? Oh, yeah, but I don't speak to them. I said, well, let's just consider trying to work with them for 25, 30 years. Bill and I know each other really well. Probably closer than most people, because they don't, brothers, they get about 18, they go their separate ways. But we were hitched together to the wagon.
Joseph was a Warner Brother executive at the time.
You would hear the same complaint, you'd hear the same cry from producers, from writers, boy, if I could do a record with the Everly Brothers, I could get them back. Well, in fact, they couldn't. We tried a number of producers, we tried a number of writers, and the boys, with each blow, regressed even more, and they were having enormous internal difficulties between the two of them. There was one incident, there was a record session, I was in the control room, and they were singing in a vocal booth, and all of a sudden there was like a bang, and you couldn't hear any more singing. Well, Philip had knocked Donald down when something had happened in the harmony, and he turned and he just plowed him under. And the session ended, of course, right after that. And they were constantly bickering. You could understand it. These boys had made it very young, had been rather unsophisticated, unworldly, attained enormous success, and now, while still at a relatively young age, in their middle, late 20s, people weren't wanting what they did.
It went terrifically for quite a while, We'd go in the studio and everything was just perfect. Boy, they made such great records and were writing such good songs. And then the publisher, Wesley Rose, I think he got a little envious of what the others were contributing. He wanted to be A&R man, producer, and everything. And there was quite a bit of pill taking and drugs involved, pep pills. And so all of a sudden it was destroyed. We'd get in the studio and we were all so tight we couldn't play because these people were all fighting amongst each other, against each other. And so it's sad.
Joe Smith and Chet Atkins. Whatever the problems, things finally came to a head in 1973. During a gig, Phil smashed his guitar on stage and walked off, leaving Don to finish the show on his own. This was to be their last appearance together for over 10 years.
Well, we were playing a week at Knoxbury Farm, and Donald had called me and said that he wanted to stop, and we ought to take some time off from each other, and I agreed with him. That was going to be the last concert. And we had 3 shows to do that night, because that's what you do at Knoxbury. And on the first show, I think Donald just overdid the circumstances too much, and when I put my guitar down, and I did break my guitar on stage, but I put it down like you'd put down a weapon. I was through. That was enough for me. The circumstances were too embarrassing, and I didn't want to do it anymore. I wasn't going to watch Everly Brothers go out in a sort of a half-ass way like that, so I quit. I mean, it sounds like I quit, but it's something that Donald wanted to do, and it's fine.
Such was the bitterness between the Everly Brothers that they had hardly spoken to each other for 10 years, and in fact only met on the occasion of their father's funeral. Phil lived in Los Angeles, Don moved back to Nashville. Albert Lee, the guitar player with the Everly Brothers band, had met Phil during one of the early tours of Britain. He remembers how bad the feeling was between the brothers during the mid-1970s.
I found myself with the Crickets at that time, and I was playing with the Crickets. And I can remember being over at Jerry Allison's house, and Don Everly called up. He said to Jerry Allison, come on over to this bar, we're playing this local bar, and it's great fun, we do it every Tuesday night, and Buddy Emmons plays. And I remember J.I. said to him, hey, I've got somebody here from England, Albert Lee. He said, oh, Albert. He said, oh, that's Phil's friend, isn't it? So it was a little bit touchy, Anyway, I went out to the club, took my guitar and sat in, and from that moment on, Don and I were like the best of friends, And I was such a huge fan of Don, and we did this gig every week, and I was hanging out with him quite a lot at that time.
The Everly Brothers continued to record as solo artists, and although both of them produced some good albums, they failed to sell in great quantities. And apart from a couple of hits by Phil Everly, one of them as a duet with Cliff Richard, there were no hit singles. Don Everly continued to tour, and he kept up his friendship with Albert Lee.
By that time, I was playing with Emmylou Harris, and I can remember going to Europe with Emmylou, and Don was on the show too, and on a number of those shows I ended up singing harmony with Don, which is kind of a surprise. I can remember rehearsing at Wembley about an hour before we were due to go on. We ran through a few tunes, and he said, do you want to sing on a couple of these? I said, what? He said, no, I'm Dream or Bye Bye Love. I said, you're kidding, aren't you? He said, no, if you know, I'd really appreciate it if you'd sing on them, you know. So I did, you know, and it was straight in at the deep end. I was an Everly brother, you know.
As their solo projects failed, it was inevitable that the Everlys would make a comeback. People still wanted to see them together, particularly in Britain. And so they patched up their differences, and a reunion concert was planned at the Albert Hall for September the 23rd, 1983. Albert Lee again.
I always hoped that if they ever got back together, that they'd ask me to do it and I'd be available, you know. And like a few years later, and I was actually playing with Eric Clapton at the time, I got a call from Terry Slater from London saying, oh, it looks like we're going to put something together, you know. Can you do it? I said, God, I'll be there, you know. And we were actually talking about maybe doing a quiet little gig somewhere as a warm-up, you know, but then they said, no, that would be cheating, you know. This has got to be, you know, the first gig. And so we forego the luxury of having a little warm-up gig somewhere at a little club and did it cold at the Albert Hall. And we'd been rehearsing, you know, but it was very exciting for me, I must say.
I was there for that reunion on September the 23rd, 1983, and they came on from separate sides of the Albert Hall, and they were on stage together for the first time in 10 years.
How you doing?
Since that concert in 1983, the Everly Brothers have continued to tour every year in America and every other year in Britain. Their influence can be heard echoing throughout popular music. Their harmonies can be heard in the recordings of the Beatles. You can hear their sound in the Hollies, Simon & Garfunkel, and the Eagles. Their contribution to pop music is enormous. And this year, 40 years since Bye Bye Love was released, they're being presented with a Lifetime Achievement Grammy Award. And they're still going strong. Here's Don Everly.
I'm really happier now, basically, musically, because I work with Buddy Emmons and I'm talking to Brent Mayer over here at Magnatone, and I'm going to do some sort of project. I'm hoping to drag Phil into some kind of project. One, I'd like to do a really good country record with Phil and I. Because basically, that's what we are. I mean, especially with country music, the state it is now. I mean, I know we couldn't be called new country. I know what they'd call us, but old new back here on the home and arranged country or something. I don't know what they'd call us, but we certainly could do it.
And in 1997, the Everly Brothers will be on tour again in Britain, and we'll be recording them live for a concert that you'll be able to hear on Radio 2 later this year. I'm Mike Reed, and this has been a Smooth Operations production. And on this day, the 1st of February 1997, Don Everly's 60th birthday, I'll leave you with the sound of the Everly Brothers.
I'll never let you see.
88 to 91 FM, this is Radio 2 from the BBC.